Hi, everyone. Great to see you. I'm Gabriel Metcalf. I am the head of planning for California Forever. And this is the second installment of some LinkedIn Live conversations we're doing with the people working on the East Solano Plan. Today, I am very excited to be joined by Laura Crescimano. Laura is the co-founder and leader of SiteLab Urban Studio. And SiteLab is the urban design firm that has been working on the East Solano Plan. Laura founded the firm in 2012 and has 2 decades of experience on planning and design. She knows everything about cities. Laura has written extensively, lectured at Cal. She's on the San Francisco Waterfront Design Advisory Committee. So please share any questions you have for Laura or me in the comment thread, and we'll do our best to respond to those. So Laura, thank you for joining today. Let me start out by asking you, please tell us a little bit about SiteLab. What is the vision that you have for this firm?
Sure. And great to be here with you, Gabe. So SiteLab is an urban design and strategy firm that I founded in 2012. It's a little unusual to be a standalone urban design studio. Often you find them as part of larger architecture and engineering firms or planning firms. And truthfully, when I started out studying architecture, I didn't really know what urban design was. And what we do ranges from complex kind of infill master plans and framework plans. So where you have a multi-block area in a city, thinking about what should that be? How do we develop that? To resilience planning, coastline and addressing sea level rise and how our cities change. We've been working quite a bit since COVID on public realm and downtowns and downtown recovery. And SiteLab, we're about almost a 25-person team now with people from all over the world. I think we have 8 different countries represented. We've worked over the last 10 plus years on really getting tens of thousands of homes entitled. And I would say in our work, what really drives us actually is these big questions facing our cities and facing how we grow in general and specifically in California.
Okay, so Laura, how did you come to this work? How did you become an urban designer? What were you doing before you decided to found SiteLab?
So as I said, I did not know what urban design was. I think maybe my path would have been simpler if I had. It was not linear. I took quite a few detours. I actually started out studying literature and then found architecture, and I thought it was very interesting in how it represented like our stories in cities, and it shapes how we live and act, and also expresses the politics of cities. So I got very involved in not just design but politics and like all the issues that really are around urban and public life. And so I went through, I studied spaces of protest. I worked on strategic design, looking at actually like in the healthcare system. I renovated apartments. I did a lot of different things to kind of find my through line, which was this issue of urban life and public life and using design and urban design and city planning as the vehicle. And I was very lucky that as that was all kind of gelling for me, I met Evan Rose, who is the co-founder of SiteLab. And we were, speaking the same language and really interested in this work that could look really strategically at how do we design things that could be built in the world, and how do we bring together, the intangibles and the thinking about experience with the physical pragmatics of like what the buildings and the landscape and the street design, and building practice really that is around the social aspects of the work.
Okay, so I know you have a national and an international view on cities, but let's talk California. During your time practicing, what have you noticed in terms of trends? Is anything changing? Yeah, what do you see?
I think it's an interesting thing because I would say California is both a real leader and a forerunner in, I think, issues of sustainability, in thinking progressively about how to engage people in decisions about what happens in land use and what happens in their cities. And that's really like our site lab is built on that, right? And is built on the idea that we want multiple voices and bringing everyone together. And I really value that in California. And it's hard. Process makes things harder sometimes. And I think what I have seen, and I will say we've entitled a lot of units. Some of them have been built and some of them haven't. I think in the last 5 years, you can see a shift. And I think the urgency and awareness of the risks of not building are more apparent. So there are even more advocates coming out to see that and to kind of motivate for change, that like we need to see change in our cities and communities to be able to grow and to include more people. And so I do see that there has been a general shift and a kind of a willingness to embrace that change. And I would say even at the scale of like, we were just recently had a planning commission approval in San Francisco for a transformation around a mall to build 3,500 units of housing, and a real excitement across a cross section of people coming out in favor of that. So I do think there's a new opportunity in California to kind of embrace growth and change.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta say, and I totally agree with that. I feel like the kind of moral clarity about, in particular on the housing side, the moral clarity that it's not okay to just say no. It's changed so much in 20 years. People, I think, really understand that, I know, Blue America, the places Democrats control, has done all these amazing things, but it has failed so terribly on housing production. And I think that's amazing, but we still have a long way to go in translating that into results on the ground, right? It's one thing that the language, the public discussion has really changed. People are much more pro housing in the words they say, but we still have a long way to go. I mean, one thing I really think is interesting about entering that as an urban designer is it still matters that we do a good job with how we grow. It's not just about hitting the numbers on units, although that's like baseline, but can we also make it something that in 100 years people are going to look back and be like, hey, this was an era of city building that we are proud of. It like stands the test of time. I mean, what does that take?
This is something we think a lot about because as urban designers, we set some of the bones, but we don't get to control like, the end game. We don't, an architect may come in and design a building. Different people come in and become the business owners or the residents. And that's a good thing, right? So for us, what that looks like is how do we kind of create a framework, or what are those bones, right? I think a lot about how public and private meet, how we can, and this has been a trend, move away from separating out that we have an office only downtown and we have a residential only area and that everything is separate. So in a lot of our work, it's about mixing and creating those opportunities to have everything nearby. It's a lot about how we move around, mobility and transportation and transit and having choices. And these are, I'm jumping ahead, but these are all things I think we're excited about for the East Solano Plan. But it is trying to figure out what are the principles to set in motion, but not conclude, so that there's room for it to be brought to life.
All right. I'll take that as a segue. So I reached out to you early in 2023 to say, I've got this really interesting project to talk to you about, and can't tell you where it is yet, but it's big. And yeah, what was your first reaction when we started talking about it?
Especially when I didn't know very much about what it was. I was certainly intrigued and a bit skeptical. At Site Lab, our work has always been more in infill and in existing cities. And so this was definitely outside of our comfort zone. And we, thought a lot about it. I had a lot of conversations with you about it, about why and what and how, what the ambitions were. So that, I think in those conversations, the discussion around how we really do grow and the, agreement about the investment inside our cities, in San Francisco, in Sacramento, in the cities we have, in the city of Solano County. And at the same time that we need more tools. And so that to me was really, that opened up like my consideration of this project and opportunity to say, what if we could kind of find a third way, a different way, in addition to how we're building in our cities, and simultaneously build those solutions.
Yeah, we've built a team on the planning side that is intentionally people with a lot of infill development experience, meaning inside existing cities, and people with a lot of greenfield development. So developing where nothing was built before. And so we have people with, we have a team that has experience with both. At Site Lab, it's been much more infill focused as a firm. I think to get your head around it, you have to really have a kind of an abundance mindset that not a zero-sum game. And I find myself, when I was at Spur, I would say this all the time. If Oakland is successful, is that bad for San Francisco? No, it is not. There is room for a lot of places to be successful. If San Francisco is successful, is that bad for Marin? No, it's not. Like we're in a region together. There is plenty of room for everybody to share in prosperity. There's also plenty of room for us to inflict our problems on each other if we don't deal with them, particularly on housing. But when you think about turning, as a student of cities, when you think about turning your mind to the opportunity of planning something from scratch, what would you say are the what are the key elements of the plan?
So, it is definitely an unusual thing to I think often we look for the constraints and how to work within them. And this is like, well, what if you could choose certain things? So I would say, first and foremost is about putting people first in the design. So it's not infrastructure, it's not the car. It's like, what makes it a most livable place for people? How do we create a system like the city grid? The transportation system is kind of a fundamental backbone of any city. And so choosing something that is really about connecting and giving choice and giving really robust opportunities, whether it's to bike, to walk, to take transit, and making that actually feel safe and maybe slowing it down a little bit. I think about this, like, I will say I live in San Francisco. I'm an urbanist. I believe in reducing our car usage, and I don't feel safe biking around a lot of the time. And so thinking about what would it look like to actually make me willing to put my kid on the back of my bike and do that. And so that really, it's trying to think at that level at the same time at thinking at a really writ large city level of like, we can actually create the grid to do this. We can create, the bike paths and the landscape. So that's a fundamental thing, but it's also that this is a huge opportunity. And one of the things I've appreciated about the approach to the project is it is not about just deciding on all the details. Like, Site Lab will not be designing all the details. It's how we're creating a framework to create a lot of opportunities, create, the mix of uses and jobs and housing and arts and creativity to come together, and open spaces and all of these community spaces. And then they will become different things. They should become different things over time and not look like the drawing that we might create right now. And then the last thing, which is, I think, as we've talked about, one of the biggest parts of the conversation is housing. Just knowing that that we can push the design of this city to try to do more to give people housing choices and to give opportunities for different kinds of builders to come in at different scales is really compelling to me. And I think that there's a lot, I think, of thinking about that. How do we have choice? How do we have it's not all the same kind of buildings, and we can you can kind of have individuality and have that smaller fabric while still having the experience of a city to walk to the market, to the park, to the school.
Friends of mine who live in San Francisco or Oakland, some of them will be like, you just can't make it interesting when you're building a new city from scratch. And I generally say you're right. Like a city that has grown up over hundreds of years, where it's got all those layers of all these different periods of time. You've got the Carnegie libraries, and then the WPA libraries, and then the horrible 1950s libraries, and good and bad, and it's all mixed up together. If you have enough money that you can afford San Francisco or Oakland, then that's awesome. Those cities are amazing. We're trying to develop an offering for people who are priced out of the superstar cities. But I also think there's something about in thinking as a city planner instead of as a developer. As a city planner, we're thinking, how is this going to be really an interesting place in 50 years, where it's where we've created a framework where a lot of different people have come and started a business or built a home, and it actually is starting to get that layering. And yeah, I think it's what you just said. It's inviting the unexpected because we're not controlling everything.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, I know we've talked about it, and it's something really important to us, that even though the point is that we can't control it, we do want to think about it and make sure that there's space, even in the way we talk about the place. And hopefully that leads into what are the processes to come of how do you make it a good place for artists? How do you have a true income range? How do you kind of create spaces that people feel welcome and that they can kind of co-opt it and do things you didn't plan for it? And so that is while we're creating, we're designing and making drawings and trying to create framework and system, it's always to be held a little bit loosely to enable those things. And I know it's a long game, right? And it's you look at places that have been built out over the last 25 years, and the ones that are on year 25, it's, things start to evolve, and you see that. So I think that each increment of population and people brings life to it. So that's part of it too, and leaving the openness for that.
I forgot to say this. Anybody who's interested, who might be tuning in and wants to ask questions, please feel free to submit some. Laura, we're in the process now of working on the plans, trying to figure out more detail on how it's all going to work. If Solano County says yes, we're interested in seeing what you guys can do, what do you think some of the impacts are likely to be in Solano County and maybe the other cities in the county?
Yeah, a range of things. I think one is the opportunity to bring energy and jobs and kind of population and housing, and and open space and parks. I think there's a lot that this could offer just to day-to-day lives of people in Solano County as an experience. I also see this as the potential to be a model for Solano County, for California, for how we think about cities, and believing that we can create healthy, sustainable cities and people will choose to live there. So I see that opportunity too. We know it too, where it's like a lot of people want to go to walk down and have a Main Street experience. They might have to drive to get to it, but that's like they want to put their car away and have that experience. And so I'm excited about the opportunity that this project could do that at a much larger scale, and give people that model.
Yeah. The it's interesting, the street grid that you've laid out is it's a very classic American street grid. And what's interesting is that whether you're looking at Rio Vista or Manhattan, the street grid is actually not that different. It's kind of interesting. And it's not an artfully composed street grid. It's just a grid.
Or a clear one. I do think a distinction in what we're trying to do in the grid is this idea of creating kind of, there are more of the movement streets and transit that is the main grid. And then inside of it, we're like slowing everything down and protecting it so that it is more like community streets. And so there is like a distinction there, even though all of them should be good, safe streets, that there is more of that sense of neighborhood and slowness and community, and a kind of tilting of what we privilege in space. Even if you can still drive your car through, you can still do all the different things, but there's just like a different, in the design and in the kind of operations, a different sense of the priorities.
Yeah, totally. All right. So I got a question about will there be public transit? So if you want to live in East Solano, but be connected to the rest of the Bay Area, how does that work? And so the answer is yes. The answer is yes. I'm going to go ahead and answer this, and then you can add in. We are really working hard on public transit. It will be primarily it'll be a bus-based public transit system, and it'll be connected to other cities in Solano County, so Vacaville, Fairfield, Vallejo, Rio Vista. It'll be connected to BART and to Capitol Corridor, but it's also going to be connected to the East Bay and to San Francisco, to Davis, to Sacramento. I kind of expect that in the very early years, we're going to have a lot of residents in East Solano will work at either Travis Air Force Base or at UC Davis, because those are really major employers that are very close, and they're struggling with housing. So we'll be able to help. Over time, I think that's gonna shift to we'll have a lot more jobs in East Solano. But part of the magic of this is being part of the Bay Area. And we really feel like people are going to want to, probably not commute every day, but stay connected to friends and family and occasional commuting. And that's part of like the joys of living in a compact community, is not having to drive everywhere. Anyway.
And just to add on to that, Gabe, I think that having that, not only having the external transit connections, but then having the, like in the design of the city, thinking about how do we really embrace that? So coming into like a central station, having it connect to different points, but also how we bring things together so that the experience of that isn't just a purely commute experience, but it's actually like, you might want to live near the station, or you kind of like, it's a place you would want to be in the evening when you're coming back. So really trying to build in the layering in, like what are the values and the opportunity of those connections and having the transit.
Yeah. Okay. Laura, we're the voter initiative for the Solano Plan caps population at 400,000 people. That would be over, many decades. But a question about the early days, when it's the first 1,000 people or first 10,000 people, how does it work? How does that phasing and transition work?
This is definitely a balancing act. And I think there's some of the work we have been doing, and it's, I think, shows in some of the imagery, but is how do we get to this kind of compact density? So how can you have townhouses or row homes that can flex to be single family or to be multi-unit? How do we think about managing parking in ways that we can get really more cost effective apartment buildings? So it is still, I think in the predominant will be like a 4 to 5 story kind of density. And in the early phases, really looking at both that, like still having an array of choices, but also incrementing, I think there's a lot of work to be done on like who would be the early movers, and what are they looking for? And how does that fit with the broader goals and the sustainability and the success of it as a city?
Yeah. One of the big things we have to get right on the planning is the way we phase infrastructure. So you need the infrastructure to stay ahead of the population growth or the job growth to enable it, but you don't want to be so far ahead that you spend all the money to build all the infrastructure, and then you have to wait years and years and years before people use it. So you have to manage that phasing carefully. So yeah, we're going to be doing a lot of thinking about that.
I think it's not just about, these are different elements. And it's also about how can the first phase really actually be a microcosm so that you get the experience and you're able to have the shopping or have the market or the school. So that's also the thinking is how do we put those pieces together in a first phase? So you're not waiting, until you're at, the 400,000 or 200,000 to be able to actually get the experience of a city at a smaller scale.
I really like the analogy of college towns like Davis or Santa Cruz in terms of a scale. There's a lot of college towns that are like 80, 100,000 people. And at that scale, you start to really see that they have a critical mass of jobs. And I think it helps people kind of visualize what it's like in the, hundreds of thousands of people, but not a giant mega city. Okay, a question about our street network. So we have this concept of super blocks with movement streets as well as community streets. Are there any precedents for that we can point to?
We've looked at a lot of places, and we're making a little bit of our own amalgam. Places that I think are interesting models for us. The two that we've looked at the most probably are Barcelona and Tokyo. So in Barcelona, it's actually more of a retrofit. So taking a kind of a macro street grid and then removing cars from inside it or limiting like the movement and the connectivity and for vehicles, not for people and bikes inside of it. So there are places where they're doing it retroactively. And then, Tokyo also is an interesting model that's evolved over, centuries of thinking about this kind of like the boulevard, right? The larger streets and the kind of heavier circulation on the outside, and then this kind of like different scale on the inside. So there are some models, but I don't know that what we're proposing actually exists anywhere. And just even to add to that, we're using the term super block, but I think we all have mixed feelings about it because it has a history and different connotations. And so I don't know what the superia is the word in Barcelona, but what the word is that this highly connected kind of opportunity that still creates these community slow spaces inside.
Yeah. I really like the street network in the plan. I think that's one of the most interesting parts of the plan that I hope people pay attention to. Because a lot we Americans go on vacation to places where we actually can walk around, and everybody is like, boy, I wish normal life could be like this. Well, guess what? It can. Normal life being a place where it's really walkable, really safe. Okay, a question came in on water supply. Maybe I'll answer that. Water supply will come from quite a few different sources. Number one, we're going to be hyper efficient, so the per household water use will be really low. Which, by the way, most new development in California is like the new rules are really good on water conservation at the household level. But we're going to try to push the envelope on that and be really, really efficient. Number two, we'll have some amount of local groundwater within the sustainable yield, and that'll be monitored and measured really carefully. Number three, we have water rights on some land we already own. And just for example, if you end up like people may know that almonds are a super water intensive crop, and people may also know that that almonds got overplanted, so the prices have crashed, and farmers are having a really hard time making money with almonds. So you have two problems: they're using tons of water, and not making money. If we fallow an almond field and just convert it to dryland farming, that ends up providing a lot of water for human use. And so there's a few really nice opportunities like that. And then number four is imports, basically buying water from other parts of the state. And there's a really active water rights trading market in California. So all of those get layered together. You have to produce what's called a water supply assessment as part of the environmental analysis that demonstrates you have enough water for whatever it is you're proposing to develop. So that's all very stringent, and we'll be working on that over the next year. So yeah. Okay, maybe last question. In terms of sustainability, anything we're doing that you think is especially noteworthy, Laura?
Well, there's a whole engineering side that I think is advancing the kind of larger sustainability kind of in infrastructure at the the kind of city scale and the design side. I would say on one level, I think it's important that this be a place that can work with existing technologies, and that there's this like almost that it can be dumb, right? That there can be simple ways to build. And so, on one level, we're trying to make that possible, that there can just like simple wood construction. But we're also, I think, very interested, and there will be opportunities, whether it's, the things we see now in terms of building materials, mass timber, prefab assembly, different things like that. I think all of that can be possible. And we hope that this can be a place that there can be experimentation to find those opportunities. And certainly community food gardens there, the intent is that in each neighborhood, there's an array of scales of open spaces, from kind of smaller, more intimate, or like kind of small greenways and pocket parks, to neighborhood park, to district parks, to kind of some of the regional scale. And so there will be a whole array of spaces that ideally are kind of programmed and stewarded based on people's kind of needs and creativity.
We have so many things we can do on sustainability, so many advantages from just thinking about that, kind of in this era in history where finally everybody is taking climate change really seriously. I think we have a chance at being the most sustainable community in the country by kind of the really objective metrics, like greenhouse gases generated per capita. I think it's going to be, I think that's going to be one of the really exciting things. And some of that, as you say, it's really simple stuff. It's not new tech. It's like designing a neighborhood where you can walk to get to things without getting in your car. There will be, it's not a tech utopia. It's just a walkable city, but being really efficient about all of that. we're going to end up with way lower greenhouse gases per capita than any other city, I think. All right. Laura, thank you for joining. Thank you for all the work on the project. Everybody, thank you for tuning in. If you want to learn more, eastsolanoplan.com.